Stand by. We're going live. We're going live. 10, 9, going live. 8, 7, 6, 5, going live. 4, 3, 2, 1.
Welcome to 10 Seconds to Air. I'm Alita Guillen. Hey everyone, today I take you behind the scenes with an ABC News correspondent. One of my old colleagues, Phil Lipof, has been traveling the globe for decades, covering everything from Katrina to Sandy Hook to the war in Ukraine. He was just in Poland and he sent me a message over LinkedIn that sparked this podcast. I asked him how it was going, and his one-word response was terrifying. When I read it, it made me pause and think about what the public sees from a network journalist and what that journalist is actually experiencing as a human being. It's not easy being out there bringing us these stories, and there is a lot that goes on behind the scenes, as we are about to hear in my conversation with ABC News correspondent Phil Lipof. Phil, so good to have you.
Good to be here.
Good to be here.
Good to be with you.
Oh my gosh, it's been too long since you and I have spoken.
Yeah.
You have reported on a lot of places, including Poland. You're now working on a series with musicians, and you have been a reporter during an interesting time of how people consume information. I mean, no
the
joke.
Business has changed a lot since you and I reported together.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah. Well, let's start off with the question that I ask every guest, and then we'll dive into all that stuff. What goes through your mind 10 seconds before you go on air?
Depends on what I'm covering.
Okay.
I know you probably wanted like a 1 or 2 word answer to that, but
it's all good.
You know this. It's different. It's different every time. There are some times where I'm really focused on what I'm going to say live around the piece that I'm covering, because, some breaking news had come in and they've just talked to me in my ear and you need to add this, to your intro or to your tag. There are sometimes I'm nervous and telling myself to calm down because I know it's a really big thing. I did a network special on July 4th, that parade shooting, and it was the first time I was going to break into national news, right? And so I was nervous, so just calm yourself down. It's different every single time. Most of the time, it's just take a deep breath and focus on the material. It's just, be connected to whatever it is you're about to tell people. And that's kind of what I'm thinking 10 minutes before I go on the air. And 10 seconds.
Simplifying it. You break it down and you're simplifying it.
Yeah. And just I'm laser focused on what it is I am going to tell people. And if it's a sentence I need to focus on, if it's a thought, if it's a word that I need to hit, that I know I need to hit for this because it's important for people to hear, usually I'm focused on content.
Yeah. Yeah. So I want to start with Poland because we're at about the 6-month anniversary of when Russia invaded Ukraine. You were in Poland the night before, right? The invasion, the day before?
Right. So it was a Sunday that as I mentioned to you, I had been able to fill in on Good Morning America. So I anchored the show that weekend. Sunday I came home and thought, okay, now I can kind of cruise into a little bit of time off. It was really intense this weekend. And a couple hours after I got home, I got a call, hey, if we needed you to go to Poland, would you? And I said, yeah, of course. When? And they said, 4 hours. So I got on a plane that night, flew overnight to Warsaw, reported for a day in Warsaw. That was the day before the invasion. And then I drove 2.5 hours south to Lublin, Poland, which was 60 miles from the border of Ukraine. And I was there for 3 weeks.
Wow. How do you describe that time?
Well, it was incredibly sad. I was sad the whole time. For the people I was talking to, it was primarily women and children coming across the border because the men were not allowed to leave. Mm-hmm. They were of fighting age. So as an empathetic human being, I was devastated to see what was happening to an entire group of human beings. Yeah. This was not to any fault of their own. These women were just taking care of their families and loving on their children like you and I do. And all of a sudden they have to flee because bombs were falling all around them. So it was a lot of things. Professionally, as when we cover stories, there's the covering the story, there's getting what you need to get, and you go into journalist mode. But then there's the human being. So I was happy to be there because that like when you're a journalist, you want to be where the story is, not just covering it, but right in the middle of it. So I was fortunate that the network sent me over there. I was with an amazing group of people. And every day for 3 weeks straight, we just got up and we got new stories. We went to the border. We followed a family to Belarus. We were in the first shelter in Warsaw. We did incredible things to show the world what was happening to Ukrainians who were under attack. So it was exciting in that sense. It was energizing every day, knowing that I was telling a story that needed to be told, and it was devastating and horrifying. And I think I texted you, what, terrible?
Yeah. But I texted you and I said, how's it going? And you said terrifying. You had one word.
Yeah, and that wasn't because at that time a lot of people in Poland thought that in 3 days Putin and his army were going to be through Ukraine and into Poland. The Polish people really thought that. But that wasn't what terrified me. I felt pretty safe. As we have sort of a false sense of security when we're covering stories,
which we'll talk about because now things are changing. But
big time. And when I went to the border, I was concerned, but the word terrifying came back to you because it was terrifying to see firsthand what people can do to other people for absolutely no valid reason.
Yeah. What were your days like?
So initially, they sent me there to field anchor for ABC News Live, the streaming division of ABC News. And I think they chose Poland rather than Ukraine because they wanted a camera that they knew wasn't going to have to move around. They knew I'd be stationary. I'd be able to be there for all the shows, this consistency. And they wanted me to be live in front of the camera when they needed me. But when we woke up that next morning, and we heard that there were thousands of people coming across the border, my producer, Nate, and I looked at each other and we said, we have to go. And the great part about this was we were working 6 hours before everybody was getting up here in America. Mm-hmm. So we would get up, go to the border, shoot, get people's stories, come back, put them together, which usually isn't done out in the field in this sense anymore. You send your stuff back and it's edited and there are producers. But Nate is a photographer, producer. He's just amazing. And he comes from local news. I used to work with him when I'd go to DC from Boston. He worked with Hearst. So we've known each other. He's an incredible journalist. And he and I would sit there and we'd put a 2.5 minute piece together on what was going on at the border, or we'd focus on one specific family. And by the time people got up here in New York, we'd call them and say, hey, this is what we have for you today. I'm going to be in front of the camera, but I've got this to toss to.
Yeah.
And
they must have loved that. Yeah, they probably loved that.
Yeah, but this is 21 days straight. We had original content. I think there was one day where we didn't. And that's how I go about covering something. I could not stand in front of a camera knowing that 60 miles from me, this was happening at the border. Right. And to be fair, they didn't want me just to stand at the camera and ignore that. They wanted us to do everything. And the time frame, the time difference allowed us to do that. And every day we told someone else's story. We followed people to the border of Belarus, to the first shelters, the Polish people taking everybody in. Like, we covered every angle of it for 3 weeks straight. There were no days off. There was no time off. It was you finished, you went to bed, you got up, you did it again. That's what you do when you cover a story like this.
So when you say that you're at the border and you hear that thousands of people are coming in and then you get to the border, are you seeing people walk across the border? Are you seeing people drive? What does that visual look like?
All of it. And in the initial days, people were walking across. And mostly, if they walked across into smaller countries. When they were coming across into Poland, because it's a bigger country than Slovakia or other places that people were headed to, They drove across. The first day we heard it was taking people 4 or 5 hours to get across the border. And by day 2 or 3, it was taking people 15 and 20 hours
Wow, they're just
to
a
get
line?
across the border.
You mean because there's a line, a backlog?
Yeah, that went right into Ukraine. We saw buses. I think the amazing thing to me was when people got across the border, there are 2 million Ukrainians already living in Poland. So people had family and friends. But a lot of people came across the border who didn't. So they now cross the border into Poland, a place that maybe they've never been before.
Yeah.
And they don't know what to do.
Yeah.
So the Polish government set up welcoming centers to try to help them out. But what I saw in the initial days were Polish people. And then after a week or so, it was people from France and Germany and Belgium. They came as far as Belgium, all over, bringing buses and just saying, hey, we'll help bring you to here. Just rides for people, And there was, I remember the first day, just guys were standing there and saying to these women and children, come on, get into my car. I'll drive you someplace. And I remember saying to my crew that day, there's a lot of leeway here for people to take advantage.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, oh my God, I remember someone saying to me, how could you say that on this day when they're doing this?
Yeah.
And it turned out that was happening.
Yeah.
Not a lot, but it was happening. My first concern was, as a dad, if my wife and children had to cross the border, would I want them getting into a car with a stranger?
Yeah.
No, but a lot of these strangers were helping these people. So, I've never been at a border during a refugee crisis ever.
Right.
So this was all new to me. And it was literally, you don't think your heart can break in so many ways.
Yeah.
But every day it broke in a different way. It broke when I saw children crying, holding their favorite stuffed animals. It broke when I saw an 86-year-old man who I talked to who said his father fought on the Ukrainian front in World War II against the Nazis. He's a Holocaust survivor and has to flee his country into Poland. Like every day there was another story where my heart broke. It was, it was overwhelming at times.
Yeah. So, we talked about 10 seconds to air, what goes through your mind. I can't help but to think when you were there and you were doing those live reports, what was going through your mind in that situation? Because like you said, for you, they're slightly different every time you hit the air. Do you remember some of the thoughts that you had before you hit the air with those stories? Because it sounded like it affected you, that time really affected you deeply. Well, it did. And that came across in my reporting, so I'm told, by colleagues, by family. And it's what's needed in a situation like that. It wasn't like I was taking a side, right? It's a war. Most people understand that the Russians attacked Ukraine. I mean, that's just a fact. So I wasn't, bad Russia, good Ukraine. I was saying this is happening, and these people, their lives, I tried to, you can report on something, but you got to find a way. And that's what I was doing before I hit air. Find a way to use my words to grab people in the United States and across the world, because with streaming, I was getting, texts I got a text from a journalist in Nepal, Ireland, journalists watching the coverage on streaming. So I knew a lot of people saying what? Saying, I'm watching your coverage. Okay. It's great coverage. It's really necessary. We need to be following the refugee crisis because, this is going to be horrific. I was thinking about ways that I could communicate with people what I was seeing, because, this is lost in translation sometimes, even in video. I think stills are more powerful in a situation like this. And so I was trying to figure out how to do that. Yeah, yeah. That's what I was figuring out right up until the air, because also I'm doing this coverage with the folks, my colleagues who are in Ukraine. Yeah. Ian Pannell, Martha Raddatz, James Longman, Maggie Ruley. These are some of the best foreign correspondents in the world. And they're in Ukraine covering the attack, the assault, what's happening there. Maggie came over to Poland, I think took over when I left, and then she did the reporting there. These are some of the best people in the business. And I've just gotten to the network, recently. Yeah. So I'm thinking to myself, all right, I have to report with these folks. And, my portion of it was this refugee crisis, and I dove into it. And I mean, just the elements, Alita, woman fall to her knees on live television and thank the Polish people while she was crying. Yeah. Like,
I'd never seen stuff like this. And so I just tried to do the content and these people justice.
Yeah.
And that's what I was thinking every time I went to air.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I'm going to dial back a second. You just said, I wasn't taking a side, which is an interesting comment from a reporter to make. And it kind of leads me to the idea of what journalism now is and how much reporting has changed. This is not really a situation, in my view, where you really have to think about not taking a side. I know as a journalist, when we report, we were taught to not take a side, to not voice our opinion. Things have changed in the last few years. We've had a lot of questioning about what is real news. Trump brought in fake news, and that's been a thing where is it real? Is it not real? So it's interesting. And then we've got all social media. So it's interesting to me that you would make that note to say, I wasn't good Poland, bad Ukraine. I mean, it is, bad Russia, good Ukraine. Russia did a bad thing. And for some reason, it's hard for us as journalists sometimes to do that. But do you find, my question to you is, journalism has changed. And how has that, how have you responded to that? How has that affected you and how you cover things? Because I hear it in just what you said in just that note. So clearly it's a consciousness now that you have that maybe you didn't have before.
Well, I guess in me saying I'm not taking a side in a war is this. I wasn't there to be a commentator.
Right.
Right.
I get that.
And we have some foreign correspondents who do a little bit of both. They're telling the story, but they have this breadth of knowledge and experience in war zones where they can speak a little more freely, like an Ian Pannell, a Martha Raddatz. These people are the best in the business, and they have context. With me, there at a refugee crisis, I didn't need to really, and I wasn't in Ukraine, so I didn't really need to talk about that aspect of it. I was there to, have a laser focus on the refugee crisis. And there is a side to blame. They're fleeing their country because bombs are falling on their country. The politics of it, the geopolitics of it, the land grab, whatever it is, it doesn't matter to me and my coverage at that moment.
Right.
What matters to me is the people I'm meeting every day. So when I say that, that's what that is. But you pick up on something that our business, what you and I were doing in Miami together, it's not even in the vicinity of the same business. And I would say I've been fortunate enough to watch the change, but it's unfortunate enough to watch the change. It's really very, very sad what's happened to our business. And it began before, in my opinion, the trouble began before President Trump took over and introduced fake news. I think it began with the beginning of cable news, because you talk to people now and you list some anchors, I put in quotes, from the cable news, CNN, MSNBC, Fox. They're not anchors. They never were anchors. They're personalities and they're opinion people.
Yeah.
But to the average viewer, they were news anchors who were taking a side.
Yeah, they don't. But the average person doesn't know the difference, I think, is what you're saying.
No.
They don't understand that is not that's somebody's opinion. That person is a personality, is not a journalist. Correct.
Yeah. And that is the gray area that began all this, right? And for years and decades, I guess the mainstream media had a little bit of a slant left, and so then there's the invention of Fox News, and I believe when they said fair and balanced in the beginning, they weren't talking about their reporting. They were talking about, in my opinion, they were going to make the coverage fair and balanced overall. They were going to slant right because they thought the media slanted left. And that sort of began all of this. President Trump, in my opinion, and my politics, I'm a registered unenrolled, which, in the state that I'm unenrolled in means I'm an independent. So when I talk about President Trump, I always put the caveat out there that this has nothing to do with politics, right? You and I aren't talking about his ideas on immigration or tax cuts. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is what you asked me about, him beginning to introduce fake news. And most of the time that he was saying fake news, it was a report that he didn't like.
Yeah.
So fake news was news the president didn't like. And then fake news became this huge umbrella. And any time someone was living in their own echo chamber, whether it was the far right, the far left, you're living in an echo chamber, you hear something that doesn't jive with what you're thinking, fake news.
Yeah.
I hate that term so much, Alita.
I'm glad I brought it up
so much. It's like it's a triggering word for me.
I can see that.
Yeah, because I covered the presidential campaign in 2016, and I was at a lot of Trump rallies. And granted, his focus was more on CNN than anything else, but we had things thrown at us. We had awful things said to us.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the interesting part. The same people who were doing that while our cameras were rolling, while we were breaking down, a lot of them would come up to us and just want to talk.
Yeah.
Same people who just said the most vile thing to you, or just, oh, hey, almost like it was like a game.
Yeah.
Like it was this TV show, reality TV show, but it wasn't. What was happening was the view of what we do from our viewers' perspective was changing. And I was getting gas at a gas station in a live truck, and someone pulled up to us and said, F you, Biden media, and threw a beer bottle at our truck. We were just getting gas. We weren't even reporting. And the truck was up. We took all the local news that I worked for before I got to the network in the Trump years. We had to take the WNBC, the NBC. We had to take all these things off our trucks because they made us targets.
Yeah, interesting, because we used to roll around with those thinking it was some kind of protection. Would roll into neighborhoods, would roll into situations, and would say, oh, we're in the truck, we're kind of protected.
Not only protection, but a badge of honor.
Yeah, not
I used
anymore.
to have people stop. No, in New York when I was at WABC, people would stop all the time, take pictures with me. Oh, I watch you on the weekends with Michelle Charlesworth. Yeah, I mean, it was like you were like a pseudo celebrity in town.
Yeah.
Now it's like if someone recognizes you, you have to think, what's their politics?
Yeah.
Are they recognizing me because they hate the organization I work for?
Right.
Because they're far right or far left, or it's something we never had to think of before. It was, oh, someone watched me. I know that look. That person watches me. Yeah. Now you have to think, what's that look?
Yeah, interesting.
What's coming
next?
So
how does that change how you do the job, or on your daily routines? You have to think about that. I mean, I guess you are thinking about that when people approach you. But what about in your storytelling?
I thought about that since Idaho Falls at my first job, when my news director Terry Miller, who was smoking a pipe in the newsroom, and not to date myself, but when he gave me those rules of the road, and no one cares about your politics, no one wants to hear about your politics, no one wants to hear your opinion. Get out there and tell people's stories, and I've taken that to heart. So whether it's because we're in a heated political environment, or it's just I'm a journalist and I want people to take me seriously and not go, oh, that's Phil Lipof. He slants left or he slants right. So every day I go out there, and now it's even more so important because I work for ABC News, and ABC News has a reputation that I now am part of, and I would not want to say or do anything that would damage that reputation. So, but that's what I've done my whole career. So it's not like I have to try harder. I just go out and tell a story. Great example of that is when I worked for Channel 7 in Boston. It was right after 9/11, and I pitched a series on terrorism. And I said, send me to Israel. Let me go to Israel. Let me walk into the Gaza Strip. Let me go to these places. And they did. They sent me over there. And for 3 or 4 days, we were on the ground. And I walked into Ramallah, where Arafat was compounded, an exclusive interview with Shimon Peres. I did all of these things. And before I left, my news director knew I was Jewish. And he called me into his office. And to his credit, he said, listen, I know you're passionate about this, but I need you to go not as a Jew, as a journalist. And I'm like, I go out every day as a journalist, my religion, whatever. And I came back and I put 11 stories on the air. Mm-hmm. And we got as many complaints from Palestinian Americans as we did from Israeli Americans.
Interesting.
And
so they didn't know you were Jewish? Is that what you're saying?
No, it didn't matter. For me, it was success because both sides
complain.
of the
We're
issue I was
happy.
covering were complaining.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
yeah. Right.
And things, if I'm not going to slant something when I go to Israel, being a Jew,
Yeah.
then I'm never going to slant anything I ever report.
Right.
And I never have. I truly believe I never have. And we never should.
Right.
That's why the cable news thing upsets me, because it's changed the way people look at our whole industry.
So it also brings me to social media. You have kids. I have kids. They're on social media. I have this conversation. I can only imagine what it's like in your house. Your wife, Julie, is a journalist also. And your kids, I'm sure they're using social media. We won't say which ones, right? Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, whatever it may be. And kids are getting...
Alita, you're dating us.
Yeah, I'm
Kids don't
dating us.
look at
All right,
Facebook.
Snapchat, whatever. The TikTok. Do you remember? Yeah, the TikTok. So they are getting information from these sources. How do you handle that?
Well, it's funny. I've had conversations with my kids from the time they were little. They would tell me something.
You only listen to daddy.
Well, no. They would tell me something. They would tell me something they heard at school from somebody.
Yeah.
And this is starting at young, and I would say, well, you heard that from one person. Have you heard it from two people? It was like the two sources. And I got my kids thinking that like they need to hear it from another source. Now when they call me and say, hey, Dad, I heard that blah, 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 blah. I was like, where did you hear that? You've got to source that. You've got to know where your information is coming from. So it's such a journalist dad thing to do. They're probably so sick of me saying it, but
yeah, but they'll be like,
I
I heard it on TikTok and I heard it on Snapchat. My friends told me. Right.
Well, I got a call from them one afternoon saying, hey, you're trending on TikTok. And I was like, that's not a good thing. Why am I trending on TikTok? During COVID, I was reporting in New York, and there was an Orthodox community in Williamsburg that was talking about having a 10,000 person wedding. If you remember this,
yes,
right in the middle of COVID.
Yes.
And so we were out in Williamsburg every day. We were taking pictures, and the community thought that the media was there just to make them look bad, to catch them not wearing masks, and it was already a political thing. And we were just there because the government was telling us, don't gather with 5 people. Hundreds of thousands of people are dying. It's spreading. This has really been the real fear part of this pandemic. And I think it was before vaccines. It was before vaccines.
Yes, it was.
People were terrified.
Yes.
And so
it was like the original super spreader event, wasn't it?
Well, it was going to be if they had it.
Yeah.
That's why we were there.
Yeah.
And so I was about to do a live shot at 6:00, and I had talked to some people, and they gather around, in the community when TV people are there doing live shots, and the kids come out, they like to see the live truck or whatever. And I talked some people down from, they were calling me an anti-Semite at one point. And I'm like, I'm not an anti-Semite. I'm just here because you want to have a 10,000 person wedding, and that's not a great idea right now.
Yeah.
Let's
go over this. Let's go over this.
The minute I go live, I was on a side street, and there were like 15, 20 cars parked, and cars had come in. Everybody set off their car alarms and their horns. And so I couldn't finish my intro. They had to cut right to my package, and they couldn't come back to me afterwards.
Yeah.
So someone was taking a video of it and posted it to TikTok and said something like, fake news, blah, 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 blah. My kids called me. It had 250,000 views or something like that. I'm like,
of course you did. Of course you did, right. For that. Had the report come through the way it was supposed to, you wouldn't have had all those views. Oh, that's hilarious. Yeah.
So your question though is completely valid, and I think it added to what we were talking about before. You can say fake news when you're out on this, on a scene with me. You can scream fake news at me, and I get it. I get annoyed by that and go, that's your opinion. We have the First Amendment. You're right to that. But Twitter. And it was Twitter at the time, and Instagram, and all the social media platforms. You say fake news, and it spreads to millions of people in an instant. Mm-hmm. And out of those millions of people, hundreds of thousands are going to believe it, or even millions, depending on what it is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, it got really bad really quickly, and we all deal with it to this day, whether we're out on the scene or whatever it is, we deal with it.
Yeah. Let's go to your life now as a correspondent there. I'm so curious about it. You said that you don't go anywhere without your passport now because you're on your way out the door all the time.
Yeah, I spent my whole career in local news. when Julie and I we had Daniela, and I spoke to NBC at the time about a potential correspondence gig. And I remember talking to the woman who was hiring, or at least interviewing at that point. And at the end of the interview, she said to me, "Why don't you go home and talk to Julie, talk to your wife about the job?" And I thought to myself, that's weird. Like, you're talking to me, and I said, "Why?" And she said, "Well, because we had about a 30-minute conversation. For about 25 minutes of it, you were telling me about your new baby." And she said, this may not be the career path for you because you're always on the go.
Yeah.
And I thought about it. I spoke to Julie about it. And we decided at that point, having a family was more important to me than trying to get to the network, which is, most people's goal in this business, not everybody's. And so I had a family, and we had Daniela and we had Dylan. And then all these years later, I found myself in New York, not under contract, and just with the right skill set at the right time for, ABC News needed someone at that moment, to fill a void at that particular time. And I got fortunate. I think I got what is a second bite at the apple, the network apple. Yeah. It just was right. So, but I've had to learn what the network life is about, and it's very different than local.
And it's about holding on to that passport because you may go at any time.
Yeah, because so I go back and forth between Boston and New York a lot, and I never go to Boston without my passport.
Yeah.
I never go anywhere without my passport. I had a shoot in Long Island. I had a shoot in the Hamptons recently, and I took my passport because they can always call you and ask you to go somewhere, put you on a plane. It's very exciting. It's something that is very different than local, super exciting, but you have to be prepared to do it. I wasn't prepared to do it then, but my kids are older now.
Yeah, right.
And I can do it now without feeling guilty that I'm missing a feeding or missing a recital.
Right. You've covered a lot of other stories. I just want you to hit on some of the big stories that you have covered, and not so much about the story itself that we may have seen on the air, but behind the scenes. What didn't we see? I think, did you cover Katrina?
Yeah. Yep.
Is that a good example?
Well, behind the scenes, Katrina, I slept many nights. Okay, so I wasn't supposed to get to Gulfport. Boston, my station in Boston said, get on a C-130 cargo jet with the military from Cape Cod. They're bringing supplies to Alexandria, Virginia. Okay. So my photographer, Errol, and I got on the plane. By the time we landed in Alexandria, Virginia, we had an idea of the scope. And we couldn't be that close and not cover it. You know what that would be like.
Yeah, right.
So this is good behind the scenes where Errol had covered things like this before. I had not been in a situation where I wasn't going to be able to shower or do anything for a week. We were in the airport hangar, and Errol hands me a razor. And he hands me a razor. He said, "Shave your armpits." And I said, "Excuse me?" He said, "Shave your armpits. We're not going to be able to, shower or anything. The less hair, the less you'll smell." And I was like, "Okay." So
that was very self-serving of him. He was thinking of himself.
Yeah, because we wound up sleeping in a car together. We wound up sleeping in a shelter together. We slept on the ground one night, but the snakes from the water were coming up into the wheel wells of our car. So we wound up sleeping in a shelter, and then we got into a hotel room that had been damaged. But anyways, he said that we rented a car, packed it filled with water and everything, and we drove into the zone. And when we got to Gulfport, I called my station in Boston and said, "Hey, we're here. We're going to start reporting." And that was the behind the scenes for Katrina. I think the answer to your question overall is that when people see us covering these things, I covered Katrina, I covered Sandy. I was in Seaside Heights where the roller coaster went into the water. I was a block away from that when it happened. At 3:43 in the afternoon, everybody lost power. And I was one of the last live shots. So this day, when people stop me in New York, they say, "I was so worried about you in Hurricane, Superstorm Sandy." I think whether it's a hurricane, a superstorm like that, or a school shooting, I covered Newtown. I was in Uvalde. That's another one of those things. I was in Boston, and they called and said, "Hey, Texas," and that's one of those things you do. And I went out to Uvalde. I think what people need to think is we're not just there as journalists.
Yeah.
Newtown and Uvalde, I was there as a father. My son was the same age as all of the kids who were murdered at Newtown, and it affects us. Like, if you are an empathetic, compassionate, human being with a heart, you can't be standing there covering these things without it affecting you like it's affecting people at home. And in some cases, maybe even worse, because you're putting your hands on these folks. Literally, you're talking to them at arm's distance. You're feeling their pain. You're seeing their tears. Anguish up close is very different than it is on television. So that, I think, is behind the scenes of everything. Know that we're feeling what you're feeling at the same time.
And when we yell fake news, you don't like that.
It's and
No,
it's the
I'm
same
kidding.
thing.
I'm kidding.
Take a guy like Alex Jones, who for years said that they were crisis actors at Newtown. I mean, he's got one payment. He's gonna have to pay. I mean, he's now paying for that. Literally and figuratively. But I saw those people. I talked to the people there, the parents, to call them crisis actors. It's like, that's why when we're in this world now where if you say something and you believe it, it must be true.
Yeah.
No, it's not true. And that goes back to your original question. We're in this world where we used to agree on facts. We used to just disagree on how we saw the facts. Now, there are folks on cable networks and even mainstream media who are saying, look, what the former president just said, we know to be a lie. Here are the facts.
Yeah.
And then someone will say, well, alternative facts. Remember we heard that as Kellyanne Conway?
Yeah.
These are a set of alternative facts. Well, that can't be. There are facts, and then there are ways you interpret them. But there aren't alternative facts. So that's become a very difficult thing. And what I've realized is no matter what I do, damned if I do, damned if I don't. So I stopped looking at Twitter that much because I used to interact locally with viewers on Twitter constantly.
Yeah.
Some people I've been interacting with for 10, 12 years. But now if the network says, hey, you got to do a piece for Good Morning America tomorrow on where we stand with COVID. So I put the facts together as our medical unit, as we know it, as the government is reporting it. And I get hate tweets just because I covered a COVID story. Not anything I said.
Yeah.
Just the fact that I'm a journalist on TV talking about COVID. I must be trying to scare people. I must be with Fauci. I must be with Biden. So I just don't even look anymore because I get too wound up about it.
But let me ask you this, because I have to say sometimes I'm frustrated and I'm not out there in front anymore. But I do get frustrated at some of the coverage that I see. Do you ever get frustrated with, I know you're representing ABC now, but in the past, sometimes do you get frustrated with, the newscast or what it is you're covering? Maybe you want to cover something else and you're having to cover this and you're saying, well, that's not really the story.
So I felt that way more in local.
Okay. Fair enough.
You remember, it's like you get out there and you're like, okay, we had 4 different murders we could choose to cover today, and we're choosing this one. Does it really affect our viewers? We're starting with the chopper over a crash on 95. Does that really affect our viewers or just the people who are in it? Like, I ask that question all the time, and truly, I wanted to do stories when I was part of the editorial, direction at a station. I always would argue, look, let's do the stories that affect the most of our viewers, not necessarily the most sensational ones, but that was sort of the world we were living in. At this network, at ABC, I won't speak for other networks, but at ABC, I am just blessed to work with, literally. You go to a news station locally and then you tweet out, I'm working with the best people in the world, right? Yeah. Well, you work with amazing people. I've worked with so many incredible journalists.
Yeah.
But there's a little bit of a difference here at the network because, you're working with Martha Raddatz, John Carl, God, the list goes on and on. Ian Pannell, Maggie Rulli, Ariel Reshef, Matt Gutman. It just goes on and on and on. And these people have been covering international and national news for years.
Yeah.
And if I'm on a COVID story for GMA, I'm not thinking to myself, I can't believe I'm covering this COVID story for GMA. I'm thinking, that's my job for the day. That's going to contribute to ABC News' complete coverage, or as best we can do on this morning show or on David Muir's World News Tonight. Whatever it is, So I don't get frustrated with that coverage. I think if I get frustrated, oh my God, this is like when someone asks you on an interview, what's a weakness? And you go, I care too much. If I get frustrated with anything, it's that you physically can't cover everything that matters in this world.
Right. And everything that you see, because you have to pick something, right? You're telling a story for 2 minutes or you don't have the time that maybe you need.
That's the frustration I feel. Sure, I will watch newscasts, whether whatever the newscast is, and think to myself, I don't know why you just did that.
Yeah.
As a viewer, but I'm not a regular viewer.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. It's different. Okay, you're working on, let's talk about some fun stuff. You're working on a little bit of a passion project right now, right? You're doing a series about music. What is that all about? I see a guitar behind you.
Yeah, that one was that's signed by Les Paul and Slash. It's a Slash version of the Les Paul. Les Paul was not just a guitar, which he joked about to me when I interviewed him 6 months before he died. He was 93, sitting in the back of the Iridium in Midtown, eating a hot fudge sundae and drinking a beer.
That's why
at 93 at 10:30 at night.
Yeah, that's why you got to 93.
Right. And so he created the solid body electric guitar. And for me, that was like interviewing, Einstein. There's a documentary called Chasing Sound. He created reverb, the sound reverb. He created track-on-track recording, the way we record things still to this day. Guy was a genius, and I was fortunate and honored to interview him. But I love music. I say in one of my social media bios, aspiring rock star.
Yeah.
Which is a joke. Obviously, I'm not. But I love music so much.
But given the opportunity, you would go on stage, wink, wink?
Yes. Given the opportunity in Salt Lake City with the band OAR that has been around I've been listening to them for 20 years. They're a real amazing jam band. And I interviewed them for this series called The Prime Playlist. And what we do is we have all these pitches coming together, but the idea of it is we find a musician with a really interesting story. Like, for instance, OAR was about their interaction with the audience because they're a jam band. They turn 3-minute songs into 20-minute versions, feeding off of the energy of the crowd. Mm-hmm. But then there was Taylor Momsen of the Pretty Reckless. That story was about how she, got into a really dark place after Chris Cornell committed suicide, and she was on tour with him. And she was thinking about that and how she wrote her way out of it in an album called Death by Rock and Roll. We find these stories, we talk to the musicians, and they give me about 7 to 8 minutes to tell these stories, Alita.
Wow, that's insane.
That's insane.
Yeah.
But they first air on ABC News Live, which is our streaming service. So always looking for content. And then usually Nightline and Good Morning America 3 take different versions of the piece.
Nice.
But I've been wanting to do music reporting my whole career. And you noted I've covered 9/11, the Boston Marathon bombing, school shootings, hurricanes. But the entire time, music is my passion. I'm a serious journalist, but I get to do these stories now and call The Prime Playlist. And it is literally like I'm living a dream. I'm taking the storytelling that I love so much and putting it, mixing it with rock stars and songwriters and musicians that I, admire or have come to admire. We're talking to some people soon who I didn't really know. And then I took a dive into their catalog, and now I'm just as excited as anything. I did a ton of research for these, and
what are you discovering? What are you finding out that you didn't expect?
Well, your wink wink was that OAR invited me up on stage in Salt Lake, and I played their song "Hey Girl" with them, and I literally did not know what to do with myself. Like, literally, it's an out of body experience.
You didn't have
play in front of anybody.
You didn't have 10 seconds to think about that. It was just come on up here and jam.
You want to know what I was thinking about the 10 seconds before?
Yeah.
I'll tell you what it was and what I said to the sound guy before I went out.
Yeah.
Everybody was just saying, the 4 chords, just have a good time. And literally, as Mark Roberge is introducing me, and he didn't say, hey, ABC came to interview. He goes, we have a friend here, Phil Lipof. I was like, you'd be kidding me. As he was saying that, the sound guy looked at me and said, have fun. And 5 seconds before I walked out, I go, if you keep my audio low, I'll have more fun. So that's what I said 10 seconds before I went out on stage. If I knew they weren't listening to me, if I knew, then I'm going to go out there and play and have fun.
So how did you do?
I'm told I looked like I was having the time of my life.
Yeah.
I was nervous at first. then I kind of got into, the guys are so wonderful that the guitarist stood near me and kind of showed me what he was doing. All right, now you got to dial it back because we're going to go, the song gets softer. Mark, the lead singer, came over to me and smiled and said, look out at the crowd. So I literally I was like a pig in slop.
Yeah.
But
you were living the dream.
But,
you were the rock star.
I was literally living the dream. And I come back from that, when I came back from Poland, 3 days later, because I went to Madrid to visit my daughter who was doing a semester abroad. I flew from Poland to Madrid. That was great. When I got home, a couple days after I got home, I was at a secret video shoot in Brooklyn for the Pretty Reckless and Taylor Momsen because I was doing that story on them. And I just remember sitting there watching this video shoot go on and thinking, my life is really weird.
Yeah.
A week ago, I was covering a horrific refugee crisis that I'm still thinking about. I think about it every day. The people I met and where they must be. And I keep in touch with some of them, by the way, and know where they are. But then I'm at this video shoot for a song called Got So High. It's a weird world, but it's what I love about this job and probably what you did and probably what every journalist loves. One day you're doing this, the next day you're doing that. It's not a 9-to-5 job. I don't have a stack of paperwork on my desk waiting for me. You make yourself a little bit of an expert every single day in what you're covering. And I couldn't, I'm 26 years into it. And I have the same fire in my belly today as I did 26 years ago.
I can see that. I can see that.
I love it so much.
I can see that. Do you remember the days when we would get to the morning show? And this is just a little sidebar, but a little funny behind the scenes. And you and I, both from Boston. And between the commercial breaks, we used to take the scripts and we would read with a Boston accent. And the crew
It was great. Don't ask me to do that. I don't want to offend everybody I know in Boston.
The crew would crack up, and then inevitably one of us would have the next read, and we would screw up the R. Would be That's like the car, blah, blah, blah. I mean, and then the other one would be giggling like, I got you to do it.
Yeah, we giggled a lot. And this just happened. I was anchoring, I was filling in for TJ and Amy. Janae Norman and I were anchoring GMA3. And right before we went on air, Dr. Jen Ashton is there. And right before we went on air, we were talking about there's a couple of jazz guys who were coming on who were doing a charcuterie board. Yeah. And I said charcuterie, and Janae looks at me and said, "What did you just say?" And I repeated it, and she said, "There's an R in there." And I said, every once in a while, my Boston slips out, and the two of them cracked up, and literally that was the open of the show. The show we came out to us laughing, and that's what we talked about for the first second of the show. All right. So that's 20, how many years later?
Yeah, well, it originated with us in that little Miami studio. That was hilarious. Baby. Racing down the hall, 10 seconds to air, and I have to say, full circle. That was the inspiration for the name of this podcast, 10 seconds to air.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Do you remember us? 10 seconds to air. It would be. I can't think of the floor director's name. Was it Andrew? Do we have Andrew? Do you remember the blonde guy, Andrew? I think he would run down the hall. You were probably on time. But Leave and I, our other co-anchor, tri-anchor, she and I would be in there still putting on lipstick or trying each other's clothes on and would be putting our earpieces in. I'm a stickler for
time. I only ran down that hall a couple times. It was a thing with you guys, but I only ran down that hall a couple times.
You would be sitting in there, 10 seconds to air. You were probably like, where the hell are these two?
I just would shake my head sometimes. Leave. What was great about Leave, you didn't do this with makeup. Leave would not be done with her makeup. Sorry, Leave. Until the B block began, until the first commercial break was over. She literally, because it's a morning show, you're exhausted, you're tired, you're late, you're whatever. So she would still be fine-tuning her makeup. Yeah. I mean, she's so Leave didn't she didn't need the makeup.
She was beautiful anyway. Well, at least she showed up. Hey, throwing her under the bus now, she's not here to defend herself. But I do remember one day when she was like 9 months pregnant, she didn't show up for the show until not the third block, but the third half hour.
I don't remember. Yep. But hey, she had an incredible excuse.
Yeah, she did.
She was pregnant.
She was. She was very pregnant.
I used to joke, we had so much fun when she was pregnant. She would send me out after the morning show to go to Burger King to get like a sandwich and like I don't know what they were. They're not like tater tots, but their version of the breakfast.
Oh yeah,
stuff.
yeah.
And
The potato thing.
Oh my God, Lee's gonna kill me. But Lee, this is what was happening. She would dunk them in mayonnaise. Like she literally was that pregnant woman.
Oh yeah.
She just had the cravings,
Yeah.
and I would go out and I'd fill all the cravings, and
she
fill all
was
the good
she
work
was
husband.
teeny tiny. I mean, it was because she started off as this like teeny tiny.
Right.
You know, she was so thin. She needed to catch up with the rest of us who were.
And just because we're talking about her, she was beautiful before she got pregnant, while she was pregnant, and now to me she always looked like a young Sophia Loren.
That's what I say to her. That's what I say to her.
That's what I've said to her the whole time I've known her.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well,
she's awesome. Leave. We kid because we care.
Yeah, we love you, Leave. We love you, Leave, and we're both still friends with her, and we both still talk to her, and
That's
she's amazing. Phil, is there anything I didn't ask you? It's so good to catch up with you.
Oh my goodness, no, you covered everything. There's so much more to say about all the topics, but
well, we can
we've
talk
got a
again.
deadline and we have a time. Yeah, whenever you want. It's great. I got to catch up with you, to begin with, and then to be on your podcast is wonderful too. I can't wait to see where it goes.